Let me give you some context about where we are. Currently, we're at the New Minister parking space, which is directly opposite Parliament. You know, the original Parliament that we were used to going to report on things like budget, SONA, and so on. You'll remember that on the 6th of January 2022, there was that awful day where we woke up to news that part of Parliament had been set alight. There is a process underway to repair that building. We understand that maybe by the end of 2026, we should see it fully refurbished and ready to be used. But of course, that's an ongoing story, and we'll keep tabs on that. So we are here in the New Minister parking, and this is where a dome has been erected for the purposes of holding the budget speech. We were here for the midterm budget, which took place in October last year. And so this seems to be where they're going to be holding the budget. The SONA was held at City Hall. So that's the context. And a weather report. It's a pleasant day here in Cape Town. Yesterday was very windy. We literally had to hold on to cars and structures when we were coming, just to come and see the place before we did this broadcast properly. So at least the wind has abated. With me in studio, I have Ntombi Mbele-Thomo. She is an independent economist, and she's going to be with us for a little while. Ntombi, let's talk about taxes. Very controversial. Before the weekend, no one was really talking about the prospect of a VAT increase. And I remember before VAT increase last time, there was a lot of discussion and conversation and debate. But now suddenly, a weekend before the tabling of the budget, we're hearing about it. What scope do you think the finance minister has to raise taxes on any of the major taxes? VAT, corporate income tax, and personal income tax.
I think, Nompu, I am not really holding my breath to see the National Treasury and the minister giving us in his speech that the VAT or the personal income or corporate taxes will be increased. As you know, the VAT just in the month of December, when we looked at the revenue collection, it was around 10 billion less than what was forecasted. And that's already giving you an indication that in terms of spending and what is being collected by the revenue services, it's really low. That goes for the same for personal income taxes as well as the corporate taxes. And also to just bring back context with the corporate taxes, we saw them being decreased so in the previous budget. So we're not anticipating for there to be an increase in those taxes. However, I think when you look at your sin taxes, when you look at your excess taxes, those are the ones where, you know, and the possibility of your sugar taxes as well. Those are where you are possibly going to perhaps see a bit more leeway in terms of tax increases. But I think the top three, I am not really convinced.
But it's a tricky one, isn't it, when it comes to the sin taxes? Because the guys who are operating in the legitimate space, in the alcohol, tobacco, and even in the sugar space, they say that when that happens, it impacts on jobs in those industries. You take away from them in that way. Yes, of course, there are health considerations, but you know, how far do you go? On the one hand, it's important to tax so that you can get some revenue, but isn't education also the key so that people can make, you know, informed choices about whether they're going to buy cigarettes or eat that sugary cake or drink?
Right. And this is where the coordination in terms of government departments becomes very central, because with the education between the importance of how, you know, from a financial point of view, it affects employment, but also from a health perspective, which you've rightfully put, if there's coordination between the state departments to have educational, programs that actually speak to people around the issues of, you know, excessive consumption of sugar and the adverse effects, and also even stretching it, Nompu, to what we're recognizing being a contentious issue now with the limitation of health aid coming from foreign, from the US in particular. If the education around, you know, still being heavily educated around the issue of HIV and, you know, ensuring that we're not only focused on meeting the problem at the end with giving, you know, ARVs, but being proactive with giving the education to still let people know that they need to, practice safety around their health engagements. That is very important. But I also think when you look at the lesser evil, we as a state cannot afford a situation where we're much more concerned about the excess of, consumption such as alcohol or, cigarettes, as compared to essentials such as maize meal, such as, sustenance food. So between the two, I think even I as the minister would look at the ones that has a lesser adverse effect and lesser impact into the greater population. So that wouldn't be a consideration if you have syntaxes which you can play within.
On that note, you're touching on basically the zero-rated VAT expectation, that we're going to see more products zero-rated. What is your expectation? Because obviously that means that the National Treasury will miss out on some fiscal revenue if they make that concession. But it is necessary because there's some people who are literally struggling to afford their basket.
The zero-rated conversation has been continuous within the parliament structures and as well as within civil society. So it has been, going on for a long time. But it hasn't really been in the mainstream or the forefront, and so I don't see it really coming up as a major contention in this budget, but I do see continuous consultations, notwithstanding the very need of having people, citizens, being able to afford the basket of goods as you mentioned, but also to be able to afford the necessary nutritional value that comes from those foods. But what you're seeing now is that with the conversation, it's becoming heavily politicized, and it's sometimes missing the economic benefit and mark as to the social impact that it will have for the citizenry. So I think right now in this budget, it could be preluded to as a conversation point for perhaps the midterm or even the next budget of the new administration. But I don't see there being explicit inclusion of new zero-rated goods in the already existing baskets.
Now, in any economy, advanced, developing, it doesn't matter. You always need resources to fund all the imperatives. But one of the things that the Action SA chap was saying to Abra earlier was that money is not really an issue in the South African economy. It's how it's spent, particularly in the public sector. He's saying he sits on Scopa and he sees far too much leakage, too much wastage. We've seen the AG reports and so on. To what extent do you agree with that? Because of course you can never have enough resources, but how much waste do you worry that there is, especially after state capture?
There definitely is. I think that you can concur with, the man from Action SA. He's actually right, because the issue is that from a national point of view, you've got the administration, from the national legislation that will say that as Treasury, we're giving this kind of allocation. And when the allocation does not really get to the end user, what really is the purpose and the effectiveness of a budget? And these are the concerns that I think should again be coming up, because the reason why we even have the bailing out of SOEs is not only because of the issue of operational issues, but because of lack of governance, and the lack of governance component comes because of the lack of corruption. And so there's all of these things are really interlinked, Nompu, and in a fiscal consideration or situation like that of South Africa, where the fiscus room is not really there for us to maneuver, and this has been a consistent theme for over 15 years. We have not been seeing there being a surplus in terms of our revenue. So that on its own would require us to be a bit more fiscally disciplined across the spectrum of the three government layers. That's the first thing. But also the second thing is that we need to be a bit more cautious and prudent with how we use the limited resources that we have to be able to get the service to be delivered to our citizenry.
All right, Ntombi, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights, and no doubt we'll still have you in studio